Secretary Mayorkas, is DHS still meeting with social media companies to discuss content moderation?
Ranking Member Paul, you and I have discussed this before. We do not meet with social media companies for the purpose of instructing them to take down content.
You have never had any meetings with the social media companies to discuss content moderation?
What we have done in the past, Ranking Member Paul, as I shared with you previously, is we, along with other federal agencies, have met with social media companies in a public-private partnership to speak of the threats to the homeland so that those companies are alert to them.
Do you think a threat to the homeland is a discussion of vaccine efficacy?
I do not, Ranking Member Paul. And
if you'll have your staff read, and I think it'd be good for you to read also the Missouri versus Biden case, it lists time and time again discussion of constitutionally protected speech that has nothing to do with national security. So when you say you didn't meet to do with that, yes, you were meeting, you just disagree with the characterization of it. Were you meeting with social media companies to discuss content moderation? And your answer to that is no?
My answer
that's the specific question. Did you meet with them, and were you meeting with them to discuss content on the internet?
My answer remains the same, Ranking Member Paul, that we met on a periodic basis with other federal agencies and a group of social media companies to speak with them about the threat environment that the homeland faced.
Right, and this includes discussion of vaccine efficacy, mask efficacy, Hunter Biden's laptop. Are these meetings still occurring?
Ranking Member Paul, they are not. We do not participate in any such
meeting. The reason the meetings aren't occurring is because a federal judge placed an injunction on you, and the Biden administration acknowledged that they're not having the meetings. So you need at least acknowledge that the court is talking to you about this and saying what you were doing was violating the First Amendment. Director Wray, same question. Is the FBI still meeting with social media companies?
We're having some interaction with social media companies, but all of those interactions have changed fundamentally in the wake of the court's rulings.
That's sort of an acknowledgement that perhaps you weren't just talking about national security, child pornography, and human trafficking, right? You had other areas of discussion that did involve constitutionally protected speech.
No, that's not an acknowledgement of that.
Then how did you change your behavior?
Out of an abundance of caution, in order to make sure that we don't run afoul of any court ruling. I would say, by the way, of course, that the injunction has been stayed by the Supreme Court.
Did anybody from the FBI ever discuss constitutionally protected speech with social media organizations?
Not to my understanding.
Vaccine efficacy, never discussed any post concerning vaccine efficacy?
Well, certainly not, because to my understanding, as you know, the FBI was the first and for a long time the only agency in the intelligence community to assess that the COVID origin was most likely from a lab leak. So the idea that we were engaging in...
I commend you for that, but the Twitter files and other indications, as well as the Missouri versus Biden, list many cases of both DHS and FBI discussing constitutionally protected speech, vaccine efficacy, mask efficacy, people who said, my brother got the vaccine and died yesterday. And the brother actually did die, but proof of cause and effect is one thing. But taking down posts like that was part of the discussion in these meetings.
Not by the FBI. We would not have been engaging with social media companies about vaccine efficacy, to my knowledge, certainly.
Director Wray, in 2017, the Department of Justice issued subpoenas to members of the House Intelligence Committee, congressional staffers, as well as Senate Judiciary Committee staffers to turn over private information. Were you involved with that investigation, aware of it at the time?
I'm not familiar with that specific investigation.
This had to do with the leaks, I believe. We have never been told completely, but the leaks concerning the Crossfire Hurricane and the leaks concerning the conversation between Flynn and Kislyak that was wiretapped, that was classified, that somehow got out, but you're not aware of anybody from Congress being investigated?
Well, as I sit here right now, that's not something that's ringing a bell for me.
Do Do you see a problem with the Department of Justice issuing subpoenas to congressional staffers who are providing oversight to the very organization that's issuing the subpoenas?
Well, certainly, anytime there's an investigative activity that touches upon a separate branch of government, namely the legislative branch, it has to be done extraordinarily carefully. And there are all kinds of policies that the department has in place to make sure that that's done appropriately.
Director Wray, did the FBI pay Twitter money to moderate content moderation?
I'm not aware of us paying money to moderate content there or anywhere else.
What was the $3 million for that the FBI gave that's been revealed in Twitter files, which has been characterized by those writing the Twitter files as payment for content moderation? Basically, they said Twitter, you guys were meeting with them all the time, and you had them taking down so many posts. They said, well, gosh, it's a lot of work. Why don't you pay us? And so you did. You paid them $3 million. Are you aware of the payment?
Well, I'm not aware of that specific payment, but I can tell you that when it comes to payments, going back well over 4 decades, when we are required by federal law, when a company, like in this instance a provider, goes through expenses to produce information, we're required to reimburse them for those expenses. And so I think that a lot of the questions about payments revolve around exactly that.
And you will repeat under oath that there was never any discussion of the FBI to take down constitutionally protected speech. You think it's all national security, child pornography, sex trafficking, no discussion of constitutionally protected speech, because this is all going to come out, and a lot of it's come out already in depositions, but you're saying there was never any discussion by any of your agents in any of these meetings of constitutionally protected speech being taken down?
To my knowledge, our agents conducted themselves in compliance with the law throughout.
Same question to Secretary Mayorkas. You're not aware of your agents ever discussing any constitutionally protected speech with any of the social media companies?
The same answer as Director Wray provided to you, Ranking Member Paul.
Thank you, Ranking Member Paul. Senator Hassan, you're recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you and the Ranking Member for having this hearing. To our witnesses, thank you for being here today. Thank you for your work, and please thank the women and men who serve with you for their extraordinary work, all directed at keeping us safe, secure, and free. I want to start with a question to Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray. We're dealing with a constantly evolving fentanyl epidemic in this country. Transnational criminal organizations in China and Mexico change tactics frequently, but they continue to be responsible for the vast quantities of fentanyl that is smuggled into the United States, an issue that I and other senators raised with senior Chinese leaders last month, including President Xi, on our recent bipartisan CODEL. Some Chinese exporters even advertise their ability to evade customs and inspections and seizures as they advertise the availability of precursors. When it comes to U.S. law enforcement, what specific steps are DHS and the FBI taking to disrupt and dismantle the transnational criminal organizations that are supplying chemical precursors and manufacturing and smuggling fentanyl and other drugs into the U.S.? And we'll start with you, Mr. Secretary.
Senator, we have a multi-pronged approach to the scourge of fentanyl and attacking the transnational criminal organizations that peddle and smuggle in it. We have transnational criminal investigative units resident in other countries to dismantle and disrupt the cartels, along with our law enforcement partners in those countries. We have operations here that our personnel undertake to stop the flow of precursor chemicals, to interdict the equipment that is used in the manufacture of fentanyl, and to interdict the finished product. Operation Blue Lotus is one example, Operation Artemis, and so many others. We have surged our personnel and resources to, in fact, interdict more fentanyl than ever before.
Thank you, Director Wray.
So we're participating in a number of ways. I think the first that I would mention is our Safe Streets task forces are focused on the gangs that are here distributing fentanyl and other dangerous drugs. We just, for example, just this past month, guess in September, our Phoenix office, working with our partners, seized something like 400,000 pills. That kind of seizure is becoming almost routine. So there's the distribution side here by the gangs. Our transnational organized crime task forces are focused on the cartel leadership, the source of supply. We have, I think, 380 investigations just into cartel leadership that we're conducting. We also, I think a third I would mention is we have something called J-Code, which focuses on darknet trafficking and dismantling darknet marketplaces of fentanyl and other substances. We also have things like a prescription drug initiative that's focused on pill mills and the providers that contribute to the problem. And then the last thing I think I would mention is we do a number of things to try to raise awareness. A while back, working with DEA, for example, we put out a movie called Chasing the Dragon, which was put into schools everywhere. And we have a number of similar outreach efforts to try to reach students and others on the awareness side. So distribution, supply, darknet, prescription drugs, and awareness.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your efforts. I want to follow up on another theme that Director Wray raised in his testimony, and I'll actually pose this to Director Abizaid and Director Wray. After Hamas's attack in Israel, I think we've all grown concerned, and Director Wray, you mentioned it, that the attack will embolden other terrorist organizations. Have the Hamas terrorist attacks been used by other terrorist organizations in their messaging and propaganda? And I'll start with you, Director Abizaid.
Yes, it's absolutely been a feature of messaging and propaganda since the attacks. We've seen it from al-Qaeda affiliates, almost every single one. We've also seen it from ISIS, which ideologically isn't aligned with a group like Hamas, but is still leveraging this current conflict to try and sow the kind of violence, bring adherence to its cause in sort of an exploitative way.
Okay. And Director Wray, how does the FBI assess the impact of this propaganda on the threat of homeland violent extremists or other lone wolf actors?
So we have for some time expressed concern, including in our hearings with this committee each fall, that lone actors, homegrown violent extremists inspired by foreign terrorist organizations are in many ways the biggest threat we face here in the homeland. And those lone actors will draw inspiration from all sorts of things. And so to have this many foreign terrorist organizations, this explicitly calling for attacks, significantly, as I said in my opening statement, significantly takes the threat level, the threat environment, the risk to a whole nother level here.
Thank you. A question for Director Wray and Secretary Mayorkas, really following up again on that theme. Hamas's depraved terrorist attack against Israel and the resulting war has really shaken Jewish, Muslim, and other communities all across the world. And Hamas's attack comes amid a growing crisis of violence against religious communities in the United States. New Hampshire Jewish leaders tell me that their congregants are scared to go to synagogue. They are scared to attend even in the cases where a synagogue is able to hire private security to protect worship services. So what are your organization's assessment of domestic threats against religious communities following Hamas's terrorist attack, and what steps are your organizations taking to protect houses of worship and other faith-based organizations? And we'll start with you, Mr. Secretary, and then Director Wray.
Senator, we are indeed, as Director Wray communicated, in a heightened threat environment. We in the Department of Homeland Security, in partnership with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, are taking a number of steps. We are providing information and intelligence to our state, local, tribal, territorial, and campus law enforcement partners. We issued a joint intelligence bulletin together in the immediate aftermath of the terrorist attacks of October 7th. We are distributing funding, as Chairman Peters referenced, through our nonprofit security grant program to further secure places of worship. We are engaging extensively with faith communities, speaking with them about the steps they can take to ensure that the individuals who continue to practice their faith, which is so foundational, are able to do so with a sense of security. We have protective security advisors in each state throughout the country who are providing critical advice to faith communities and communities, by the way, of all faiths.
Thank you. And briefly, Director Wray.
We are tackling it both through investigations and outreach and intelligence sharing. Investigations both through all 56 Joint Terrorism Task Forces. And on the hate crime side, we've elevated hate crimes to a national threat priority. We've done lots of outreach with the Jewish community, both nationally with organizations. I've personally participated any number of times, and then each of our field offices does as well. We've done active shooter training for those houses of worship, et cetera. But the reality is that the Jewish community is uniquely targeted by pretty much every terrorist organization across the spectrum. And when you look at a group that makes up 2.4% roughly of the American population, it should be jarring to everyone that that same population accounts for something like 60% of all religious-based hate crimes. And so they need our help.
Thank you. And Mr. Chair, thank you for your indulgence.
Thank you, Senator Hassan. Senator Johnson, you're recognized for your questions.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, Secretary Mayorkas, I think you're familiar with my chart. I started developing this as chairman of this committee. Dates back quite a few years now. It's changed over the years. It used to be titled Southwest Border in Apprehensions. That's back in the good old days when we actually apprehended, detained, and oftentimes deported. For some reason, well, I know the reason, that under your administration, you've changed it now to encounters. So now it's titled Southwest Border Encounters because now we encounter, we process, and disperse. And it seems like your solution to the self-inflicted wound to America is we've just gotten more efficient at processing. I can't quite honestly think of a greater threat to America than is what is represented by this chart. And this chart represents this administration's open border policy. It's a travesty. Director Wray, you said in your testimony the threats, they're not getting any easier to deal with. Would having a secure border, would that make your job easier?
Well, I will let Secretary Mayorkas speak for border security, but I will tell you that the threats that we have to contend with that are attributed to the border, cartel violence, distribution of fentanyl, et cetera,
I have limited time. The answer is yes. Your job would be a whole lot easier if you weren't having to deal with over 70,000 special interest aliens coming from countries that are of concern to us. Your job would be a whole lot easier if this year we hadn't encountered 169 people on the terror watch list. Secretary Mayorkas, I've asked you this in the past. What numbers are represented here? How many people has this administration let in by encountering, processing, dispersing, or that have come in as a known or unknown gotaway? What approximately? I don't need an exact number. So what do we got?
Senator, let me say.
I need numbers. Again, don't filibuster me. How many people has this administration led into the country?
Let me say at the outset that our job would be a lot easier if the broken immigration system was
No,
fixed.
Mr. Secretary, I want a number. How many people have you led into this country?
I should also
okay,
comment.
I'll give you the number. It's about 6 million. About 1.7 million as known gotaways. Now, again, we don't know who these people are. We just know that they've come to this country and they're residing somewhere. Where are all these people residing? Where did the 6 million people go?
Senator, you speak of encounters, and let me share
would you
with
answer my questions? Where did these 6 million people go? Are you keeping track of them? To what extent do we have a handle on where these 6 million people are in America?
Senator, as you well know, when an individual is indeed released, they are released into immigration enforcement proceedings and are subject to removal if they do not have a legal basis to remain in the United States.
You're not answering the question. Where do these people reside? We know we've got about 100,000 in New York, and New York Mayor Adams says it will destroy New York. That's, by the way, less than 2% of the 6 million people. So less than 2%, 100,000 is going to destroy New York. What's happening around the country? I'm not going to get answers from Secretary Mayorkas. So, Director Wray, what are you doing to track these people and investigate the potential threat?
So we are tackling it through a variety of means. There are some categories I would put kind of in the terrorist watch list category, and there it's our joint terrorism task forces that are working with partners throughout the law enforcement community to try to identify.
So how many
agents?
do you have tasked to investigate potential terror threats coming into this country and those 6 million people, and particularly the 1.7 million gotaways? How many agents are on investigating that flow of illegal immigrants?
Well, I don't know that I can give you the exact number, but let me try to
ballpark.
Let me try it
Is
this way.
Is it 100? Is it a couple hundred? Is it? I mean, just a ballpark.
Well, I would say we have several hundred agents who are tackling the threats that come from the border, both from a national security side, a counterterrorism side, and from an organized crime or violent crime side.
So how does that compare to the number of agents you had on, for example, investigating the January 6th protesters? How many agents, at the height of that investigation, how many FBI agents were assigned to that task force?
I don't have exact numbers, but what I would tell you is that I
ballpark.
feel relatively confident that the number of agents working on threats that are attributable to the border far exceeds the number of people working on the January 6th investigation.
What about the height of the January 6th investigations?
Same answer.
Same deal, okay. Mr. Secretary Mayorkas, what is the average or the range of trafficking fees? I mean, because, by the way, we have a 100% secure border on the Mexican side, right? I mean, very few people are crossing into this country without going through human traffickers. So they have to pay a trafficking fee. What is that range of trafficking fees?
When you speak of trafficking, Senator, you mean smugglers?
No, I'm talking about the human traffickers. That, you know, the people coming across here are paying what, a $7,000 fee, a $10,000, a $50,000. What is that range?
Several $1,000s per person.
So how do they pay that off? How does a young woman pay off $10,000 to $15,000 human trafficking fee?
Tragically, Senator, they often spend their entire life savings to pay a smuggler.
Well, they also tragically get put into the human sex trade, correct?
There are all sorts.
Director Wray, are you investigating that? Are we busting up some? We saw The Sound of Freedom, that movie. What investigations are you doing in terms of the sex trade that is going on because of the Biden administration's open border policy?
We have a number of task forces that are focused on human trafficking, especially sex trafficking, all across the country. And last year we rounded up, I think, maybe 1,000 or so predators of that sort. And so that's probably the main vehicle through which we're tackling this, which is a significant problem.
Of the 73,000 special interest aliens coming from these countries that are concerned to ours, how many of those people are you keeping track of? What happens to them? Are we detaining them? Are we deporting them? Or are we granting them asylum?
Well, as to deportation and asylum, I would leave that to the agencies that handle that.
You're aware of the 73,000 special interest aliens, correct?
But I'm aware of special interest aliens. I don't have the numbers.
What are you doing to track them?
So if we have a appropriately predicated investigation, then those people are squarely within scope of those investigations.
So how many active investigations do you have on 73,000 special interest aliens?
I don't have that number here. I can see if that's something we can get for you and follow up.
You can expect a QFR on that one. Thanks.